Have you ever been in bed with your heart pounding, thinking, did I overdo caffeine today? Or had your mood go from grumpy to happy after your first cup of coffee and thought to yourself, is caffeine in charge of my happiness now? This video is about using caffeine for performance without wrecking sleep, mood, or appetite. In the next few minutes, I will show you the following things. First, how to break the sleep and tolerance loop a lot of people get trapped in. Second is goal-based dosing for massing, cutting, competing, and deep work. And third is a simple taper and resensitization strategy with easy replacements so you get to keep your routines. Problem number one is the dependency loop. A bit of the chicken or the egg situation for if caffeine caused the poor sleep in the first place, or if poor sleep caused you to crave caffeine. But regardless of where it began, you can sense now that you're in that loop. It may take more caffeine throughout the day to make you feel normal, and then the later you push that last dose of caffeine in the day, the harder it is to get to sleep at night and for that to be quality sleep. So just because you can fall asleep easy does not always mean that you're getting quality sleep or enough sleep. If you are someone who says that you can drink a coffee an hour before bedtime, you're one of a few things. One, extremely sleep deprived, and it wasn't that the coffee had zero effect, but that you have so much built up sleep tension that the effects of caffeine weren't enough to override it. Two, dependent enough on the caffeine that you might rationalize it's not affecting your sleep when deep down you know it probably is. Or three, you have a genetic variance that allows you to metabolize caffeine more rapidly than most people, so you can get away with drinking it near bedtime with less effect on your sleep, but not zero. Most of these people still don't drink it within 3 hours of bedtime and get quality sleep. And just because it affects your sleep less doesn't mean it doesn't affect it at all. Problem number two is mood reliance. So if you need caffeine to feel civil or upbeat, it likely stopped being a tool and it's now an emotional crutch. Low mood often follows poor sleep, so fixing the sleep tends to help. But even if it's not sleep related, the systems discussed in this video may help you see and use caffeine more strategically instead of reactively. So the recommendations I am about to give you will apply whether you feel your mood spikes are sleep related or not. Before I get into the fun side of all the stuff I just discussed, let me explain quickly what caffeine is so you know what we're talking about. Caffeine is found in many beverages and supplements like coffee, tea, cacao, mate, guarana, energy drinks, diet soda, and pre-workouts, and many more. It peaks in 30 to 60 minutes after consumption and has a half-life of 3 to 7 hours. The half-life can be affected from person to person by things like genetics, medications, and hormones. Caffeine mainly works in the central nervous system by blocking adenosine receptors in the brain. Normally, adenosine builds up throughout the day and binds to these receptors, signaling fatigue and promoting sleepiness. By binding them, caffeine prevents that tired signal from being heard temporarily. Think of this like a room full of chairs, with the chairs being adenosine receptors and the humans being adenosine itself. You start with a room full of empty chairs at the start of your day, and once you wake up, throughout the day, people, aka adenosine, would normally funnel into the room and take their seats. Once enough people have sat in their seats, you would build up sleep and fatigue and be ready to go to bed so you could empty your chairs again for another productive day. Imagine if robots funneled into the room before humans could and took up most of the seats. The robots wouldn't be there all day, probably just a few hours before they began to trickle out, but the humans would still be left standing and you would be left more alert for the time being. Caffeine is the robots in this example, acting artificially as if it is adenosine so that it can bind to the adenosine receptors and prevent it from taking action. With adenosine's braking system out of the way, neurons fire more actively, which triggers the pituitary gland to sense something's up and signal the adrenal glands. The adrenals release epinephrine, aka adrenaline, which is a hormone that increases heart rate, blood flow to the muscles, and readiness for action. Caffeine also raises levels of dopamine, which is a neurotransmitter, and dopamine is tied to motivation, reward, and mood. That's part of why caffeine doesn't just make you less tired, it makes you feel more focused and driven. With these changes, it can help you get more output out of the gym or feel a bit more primed and focused for cognitive tasks like presentations, deep work, or competitions. Let me circle back to the idea of half-life before we get too excited about how amazing caffeine can be. I touched on the half-life of caffeine before, and this is important to understand when we discuss its impact on your sleep. Caffeine is an active molecule that takes your body time to metabolize. For most people, it takes 3 to 7 hours to cut the active amount of caffeine in half, and that process continues as long as it's in your bloodstream. So if you drink 2 cups of coffee in the morning, each contains 150 milligrams of caffeine, or 300 milligrams in total, then in about 3 to 7 hours, you will still have 150 milligrams present in your blood. In another 3 to 7 hours, you'll knock that down to 75 milligrams, and so on. So you can see how smashing a few cups of coffee at 2 p.m. could easily result in a large amount of caffeine being present and active as you're trying to get to bed and get some good sleep. If you have 75 milligrams still active before bed, it would be like chugging an 8-ounce Red Bull before you close your eyes. And now you can see how the effects of that could result in some poor sleep or even some anxiety before bed. Another example using our robots from before would be that, assuming we have caffeine and the robots fill up most of the chairs, robots don't all leave at the same time. It would take you 3 to 7 hours to convince just half of the robots in the room to leave, and it would take another 3 to 7 hours to convince half of the remaining robots to leave as well. It can take days before you get all the robots out, depending on your genetics. Now, this is not to demonize caffeine in any way. It's just to make you more aware of the fact that it may be pulling you into a dependency loop where you aren't in control. So, the best thing you can do, like most things, is become aware of your current habits, set a goal for where you'd like to go, and then come up with a plan for how caffeine can serve you in achieving that goal. So, let's get into the fun stuff of how to get started with this process. The first thing you can do to get a grip on your caffeine intake is to take a roll call of how much caffeine you're consuming, when you're consuming it, and how you're sleeping at night. Gathering these 3 pieces of data for a week can help you shine the light on your caffeine consumption habits, with no need to judge them quite yet. You're simply doing this to become aware of what your current behaviors are. You can do this using a notebook, a notes app somewhere, or my handy little caffeine tracker that I designed, which you can get for free by joining my group on Skool.com. The link will be below. You wouldn't expect to pay off your credit card debt without looking at how much of it you actually have, how much money you're making each month to pay it off with, setting a goal, and then taking some actions. So while caffeine is a simple supplement during your day, you can think about it a lot like a numbers game where you can play and win. By deciding where you are now, where you want to go, and how caffeine can play a role along the way, if that's still what you want. So each day you simply jot down what you had for caffeine and when. If you aren't sure how much your beverage has in it, like your drip coffee, you simply throw that into Google or ChatGPT and you get an estimate for what it contains. The exact number is less important than being consistent in tracking it, so aim for consistency over perfection. My little tracker has an elaborate table for helping you estimate if you need it, but this can be as simple as writing it down on a piece of paper and adding it up at the end of each day. Then each morning, write down what your sleep score was from 1 to 10. If you have a handy little fitness tracker you wear, this is even better because it'll track it for you. But if you don't, try to jot it down when you wake up and before drinking any caffeine so you know it's not skewed. The next thing to do to help you get a grip on your caffeine dependency loop is to set a curfew for when to stop drinking it. If you find yourself anxious before bed or getting poor sleep, you may want to set your curfew for between 10 a.m. and noon. And if you're one of those people who thinks it doesn't impact you much, you can look at setting it for between noon and 3 p.m. You can also bias your more concentrated beverages like energy drinks and pre-workouts for earlier in the day to give you more time to metabolize them, while you put the less caffeinated beverages like diet soda, 1 to 2 of them, not 6, or your caffeinated gum later in the caffeine consumption window. Now that you have your first 2 steps of how to get a grip on your intake as arrows in your quiver, so to speak, let's take a look at what we're actually aiming for. This is completely subjective, so I'll be describing how I would best recommend using caffeine for most common goals my clients have, and you can decide from there which fits you best. If your goal is to use caffeine to boost performance in the gym, there's a few ways to look at this. Way number 1 is what is shown in the research to be an effective dose to get better performance. This appears to be 3 to 6 milligrams per kilogram of body weight, and you should take it anywhere between 45 and 60 minutes before your first hard set. If you feel you're more sensitive to caffeine or you haven't been using it at all, this is quite a large dose and could cause some digestive distress or too much arousal, so working your way up to that dose would be intelligent. Start at 1 milligram per kg of body weight and then work up to 2 and then up to the 3 to 6 milligrams per kg range if that's what your aim is. This range and recommendation stands whether you're in a caloric surplus or deficit, but there are some nuances to consider. Nuance number 1, when you're massing, you normally won't experience a lack of energy from not having enough calories like you would when you're cutting. So using large boluses of caffeine might just be causing you to turn up the engine when you already have plenty of fuel from your food and good sleep. Referencing the good sleep thing again because it's incredibly important, this caffeine could actually hurt you in some cases more than it helps, since it could affect your sleep, which is crucial to helping you recover from your hard training. Nuance number 2, you may want to consider not taking a full dose of caffeine, whether it be pre-workout or wherever you're getting your source from, every training day because your body will build tolerance to it. You won't feel quite the same psychological and physiological kick when you have that big training day for your priority muscles. And if you start taking it on week 1 of your 6-week training block, then by the time week 5 comes around, you have been progressively overloading for 4 weeks, accumulating lots of fatigue while pounding all this caffeine. All the extra fatigue you've been accruing means you have to overcome that fatigue, put on a better performance than you have for the last 4 weeks, with less of a psychological and physiological pick me up from your caffeine because you've built tolerance to it. Or you have to take double the dose and potentially pay the trade offs of a big crash later in the day and or shitty sleep, resulting in poor recovery and negating a margin of the benefits you're looking for. So starting low and slow, tapering the usage with your training goals can serve you well while massing. Nuance number 3, using it to blunt appetite. Once again, while massing, you may not have as much trouble with your hunger or cravings, and you might even have trouble putting down as much food as needed. So taking a bunch of caffeine may result in you not having as much of an appetite in the morning, making it challenging to get all of your calories for the day. And having to push your meals too late in the day, resulting in poor digestion or eating too much too close to bedtime, affects your body's ability to wind down and get good sleep. While cutting, you may feel you're ready to use caffeine for controlling appetite, so you can strategically use it to blunt hunger in the mornings or late mornings between meals, especially if you're fasting for part of the morning. However, it can be hard to do this if you've been smashing large boluses of caffeine through your massing phase and never resensitized to it. And or if you've been smashing it through the early phases of your cut when you weren't even that hungry yet. So when it gets time to pull out your bag of tricks, when you're getting low on calories and pretty damn hungry, you either have to admit your tricks are used up and that you're in a pickle, or increase the caffeine dosage and trade off some sleep quality, which is not the gamble you want to make if you're trying to retain as much muscle as possible while you're cutting. So my recommendation, use it sparingly in massing phases, maybe on your toughest training days and or towards the end of a mesocycle where your training volumes are higher and you have a deload week coming up to deal with the fatigue you may accumulate extra as a result of pushing above and beyond with caffeine. In cutting phases, I would recommend using it sparingly as well and save it for when you get into a deeper cut and the hunger gets to be more challenging to deal with, and or use it towards the end of a mesocycle like you would for massing phases. The next primary topic of discussion is using caffeine for competition. Let's say you have this competition coming up and you want to perform at your best. And you're wondering if you should crush some caffeine before the competition to help you perform at superhuman levels. Some good starting questions to ask yourself would be, have I been taking caffeine during training? How much have I been taking? Do I always take it? On the day of competition, you may want to ask, how am I feeling? Am I lethargic and indifferent? Don't really care how things go one way or another? Or am I anxious, very alert, and feeling a ton of excitement and nervousness? Depending on how you answer this, you can derive how you should dose your caffeine for competition. In general, it's a good idea to develop a pre-competition routine that you start using even before the comp with most of your practices. Therefore, if you've been taking caffeine as a part of your routine before training lately, it would probably be fine to take a similar or smaller dose before competing. If you haven't been taking any caffeine before your training, then taking it before you compete when you aren't used to it coursing through your system during your event of choice is likely not a wise idea. You just threw a new variable into the mix that you aren't sure how it'll affect you. It may boost your performance, it may be neutral and do nothing, but it could also cause your heart to race even more than it already was, causing your alertness to be far more than usual and take your anxiety through the roof, making you nowhere near as smooth, collected, and locked in as you need to be to compete at your best. So whether you should take it before competing depends on if you're used to using it already in training and if you're already nervous and anxious about the competition. If you've been using it in training and you feel it helps and you're pretty calm and confident the day of, then I would say keep your routine the same. If you're really nervous and really psychologically aroused the day of competition, regardless of whether you've been taking caffeine, it'd be wise to consider not taking it at all, or at the very least, taking a smaller dose than you normally would. You want to feel confident, locked in, already got this in the bag type of vibe, not like you can hear your heart pounding in your ears and you don't want to puke up mom's spaghetti. So now for the busy executives and creatives watching this video. How can you dose caffeine to get the most out of your deep work? For most people, deep work comes from a lack of distractions and a large amount of focus. They tend to go hand in hand. Neither requires an immense amount of arousal or for you to necessarily be in a great mood. So hopefully you can see where I'm going with this. Since you don't require massive amounts of arousal or mood spikes, it's not necessary to crush a big amount of caffeine prior to doing your deep work sessions. You're likely better off doing one of the following options. Option number 1 is have some caffeine before or right as you get started and allow that to get you over the hump of starting and into the flow state to ride things out from there. If you want, you can pair it with L-theanine in a 1-to-2 ratio to help you get the jitters out. This would be like if you take 100 milligrams of caffeine, you would take 200 milligrams of L-theanine. Option number 2, have a small dose of caffeine to get you started, and have another dose or two every 90 to 120 minutes of work. This comes with the trade-off of breaking your train of thought slightly, since you now have to remember to take the caffeine. This may be slightly easier to do by using caffeine gum or caffeine tablets so you don't have to get up from your desk at least. Option number 3, Same as option one, but pair it with some other stim-free nootropics or brain supplements like Alpha Brain, Gorilla Mind Smooth, or Genius Mushrooms. These can smooth out the effects of the stimulant and help you ride it out longer without feeling the jitters, trading off sleep, or winding down later in the day. Option number four, avoid caffeine for deep work if it gets you too aroused and you're not able to focus and get into a flow state. For example, it may just make you anxious and cause you to click from task to task. Hopefully, through this, you started to grasp a consistent theme. There aren't many hard and fast rules about caffeine, other than don't take an entire baggie full of white powder you just got from a supplement store right before a super important day of presentations for your graduate program. We've all been there, it's all good. How much pre workout was in that bag? Why did I throw up 45 minutes after taking it? Why did my heart not stop pounding for 12 hours straight? The joys of learning things the hard way. On a more serious note, the FDA says up to 400 milligrams of caffeine a day is safe for healthy adults. That's about 4 to 5 cups of coffee. But that number isn't a daily target, it's just a ceiling. Anything below it is fine too. If you push above that range, side effects do start stacking up, and you can see higher blood pressure, faster heart rate, more anxiety, stomach issues, and worse sleep quality. Over time, heavy intakes also build dependency, so you need more caffeine to feel normal, and you crash harder when you don't have it. For most people, 6 to 800 milligrams a day is where negative effects become obvious. Once you cross 1,000 milligrams, you're in a danger zone where seizures and heart rhythm problems have been reported. So the takeaway is simple. Stay at or below 400 milligrams a day and you'll avoid almost all of the risks. But back to the rules about caffeine as it relates to your goals. The best thing you can do is get in control of your intake, starting with the 2 steps we discussed at the beginning. Track your intake and start a curfew. From here, you can get a grasp of where you are currently in terms of tolerance and dependence and start to paint a picture going forward. What do I want caffeine to do for me? There isn't a right answer. You don't have to be massing, cutting, competing, or doing deep work. You can just be enjoying your life and having your morning coffee. But it will still serve you to know that you can control your intake rather than your intake controlling you. And let's get real, an amazing night of sleep can give you that euphoric feeling that's just hard to find. So everyone can agree that if it's just to improve their sleep, being in control of their caffeine intake is worth doing. So now that you know how to map your starting point and choose a goal you may be using caffeine for, let's talk about how you can creatively start to taper back your caffeine intake without having to give up your warm cup of happiness first thing in the morning or your favorite Beyond Raw lit AF bucked up sour gummy worm backflip into a volcano with your eyes closed pre-workout. If you want to cut back on coffee intake, here are a few options. And if you've been an avid coffee, energy drink, caffeine drinker of any kind, you may find some of these revolting, which is fine. You can turn off the video now and just save this timestamp for when you get another week of dog shit sleep or drink 2 Bang energy drinks in a day and feel tired as hell at 3 p.m. so you can pick up where you left off. For coffee, you can start by mixing your ground coffee in the mornings in ratios. So get some decaf coffee in the blend you like. They make almost any blend you like in a decaf option, and then mix it in to replace a bit of your normal coffee. So if you normally have a pot of coffee in the morning by putting in 6 tablespoons of coffee of your normal caffeinated kind, then start with 4 tablespoons of regular and 2 tablespoons of decaf. It'll taste the exact same, and if you can chill out for about 2 days, you'll hardly notice a difference. And then mix it equally, 3 scoops for a week. Then go to 2 scoops of regular and 4 scoops of decaf. It hits just the same as long as you acclimate, and in some cases, this can be enough to get you feeling good again and more sensitive to caffeine without having to go cold turkey. Now, if you do want to go caffeine free for a week or two, you've already been having way less of it, so you won't notice the difference nearly as much when you have your first 2 days without it. And you can keep your routine the exact same because you have the decaf coffee in house, so you can just keep having your decaf coffee in the morning. For your pre-workout of choice, many brands make non-stim versions, and while you may not want to give up your stim version completely, you can do exactly what I just said in the coffee example, where you mix it in ratios. So instead of doing 1 full scoop of fully caffeinated, do 3/4 of a scoop of stim slash caffeinated and 1/4 scoop of non-stim, and then go to half and half, and then do 1/4 scoop of caffeinated and 3/4 non-stim or non-caffeinated. You can raise and lower the ratios over time to fit your goals, and then if you want to get off caffeine for a week, you can do fully non-stim and it won't feel much different because your habits will be the same in terms of taking pre-workout, and you still get the placebo effect that gets you through just having something tasty to have before your workouts. What about diet soda and energy drinks? These can be trickier because you don't mix them yourself, but it's still about being creative. Choose lower caffeinated options to start replacing some of your favorites. So if you're drinking a 300 milligram drink like Bang or Rain, you can move down to a 200 milligram drink and then 160 or 150 milligram. and then down to the 100 milligram to 80 milligram range. You'll also want to keep a tasty drink around in the interim, like a caffeine-free diet soda or a flavored water. A lot of times you just want to drink something tasty, and it doesn't always need to contain caffeine. If you're having 6 Diet Cokes per day, you can start with having 3 with caffeine and 3 without, then 2 with caffeine and 4 without, and then 1 with caffeine and 5 without. And then you can start asking yourself, why are you drinking so much goddamn Diet Coke each day? It's about getting rid of your all or nothing assumptions and acknowledging that you get to make up the rules in this caffeine intake game in such a way that they serve you best. Yes, there's a healthy range recommended for most adults, but because of things like genetics, oral contraceptives, different work shifts, different athletic goals, etc., trying to do what you've always done, never adjusting your caffeine intake to fit your needs, or following the advice of someone who crushes caffeine all day and says something along the lines of not to worry about your intake while they go home and get garbage sleep is not what works best for you. What's best for you is knowing generally healthy ranges and rules, tracking your intake to see where you are, setting a curfew and an intake target based on what you want to use it for, and then trying lots of strategies until you find the perfect concoction that resonates with you, like being your own little coach. So let's round this out by discussing tolerance to caffeine and fully resensitizing to it. So regular caffeine use builds tolerance. Your brain adapts by adding more adenosine receptors, or using our example from before, you adapt by adding more chairs to the room so there's somewhere for everybody to sit. More receptors means more caffeine feels weaker over time, and when you stop, those extra receptors suddenly get flooded with adenosine. That's why you feel withdrawal, headaches, fatigue, low mood, and these symptoms usually start within a day, peak at 2 days, and fade over the first week. On the physiological side, a study shows it takes 7 to 14 days without caffeine for your brain chemistry to return to baseline. Light users may reset in just a few days. Heavy users, those regularly above 400 to 500 milligrams a day, tend to need closer to 2 weeks for full resensitization psychologically and physiologically. Best practice is not to quit cold turkey if you're a heavy user. Instead, taper down over several days using some of the ideas mentioned before. And this softens the withdrawal crash by removing some of the extra chairs you brought into the room. Once you're at a lower daily dose, go completely caffeine free for 1 to 2 weeks. That gives your adenosine system some time to normalize and restore caffeine's full effect. Psychological cravings, wanting a ritual, or the boost can linger past the first week, so replacing the habit with decaf or another routine that helps fill the gap is a good idea. A key takeaway here is to expect the hardest days to be days 1 through 3. By 1 week, most withdrawal symptoms are gone, and by 2 weeks, your body is resensitized, and caffeine will feel strong again at lower doses. So here's the big picture. Caffeine isn't good or bad, it's just a tool. Used with intention, it can sharpen your workouts, help you cut, or lock into deep work. Used without awareness, it can quietly erode your sleep, your mood, and your performance. The way forward is simple. Track your intake, set a curfew, line your caffeine use up with your actual goals. If tolerance is high, taper down, take a short rest, prove to yourself that you don't need it to function, and then bring it back in strategically, and you'll find smaller amounts hit harder. And you'll finally be in control of using caffeine instead of it controlling you. If you found this helpful, hit like so more people see it, and subscribe if you want to see more breakdowns like this on performance, training, and nutrition. And if you want to go deeper, check out the link below where I've got the free caffeine tracking sheet and access to my community. Take control of your caffeine, get your sleep back, and use it as a tool to hit your goals and not just a crutch that holds you back.